A couple of months back, I asked you all for some anime recommendations that you'd like to see me cover on the channel, and you guys did not disappoint. Ultimately, I was asking to see what major, long-running anime series I should cover next. Attack on Titan videos starting in 2 weeks, mark your calendars. But I also received a lot of recommendations for shorter series, and over the last few months I've been absolutely binging your suggestions. So, the shows I'm going to be discussing today are Space Dandy, Paranoia Agent, Made in Abyss, The Promised Neverland, and Erased. Without further ado, let's begin by stepping aboard the Aloha Oi. Space Dandy was a show that I had no clue existed, and when I first looked it up, I was a little cautious to start it. Although it looked like it could be fun, it also looked like it could fall into that camp of anime that's just about showing glossy tits and ass with sexual innuendos galore. While this show does flaunt the old TNA, that's not what it's about at all, and instead, it's actually maybe the most insane space comedy I've ever seen. I really loved this show. It was just a great show to kick back and turn your brain off to. The show isn't dumb though, it's actually extremely clever at showing you the most dumb things ever, led by a dumb character, and I was constantly impressed with the writing. The show lovingly refers to the three main characters as BBP, Blockhead, Bonehead, and Pinhead, because everyone is a lovable moron. The character of Dandy himself is excellent. Picture Johnny Bravo as an alien hunter, and you'd probably have a pretty good idea what his deal is. In fact, the way I've been pitching this show to my friends, because yes, this is a show I highly recommend, is that it's Johnny Bravo meets Rick and Morty with a dash of Cowboy Bebop added for good measure. If that sounds good to you, congratulations, you've got yourself a good brain. Although Season 1 ripped, I think Season 2 is really where the show hits its stride. There are some episodes in Season 2 that are peak cartoon comedy for me. The High School Musical episode is by far my favorite, but the band episode is also utterly fantastic. As you can probably tell from those descriptions, this show has a lot of fun playing around with different genres, even lending itself to slightly different art styles at times to add to the effect. I really respected that, and how unafraid the show was to be an all-out cartoon. It was colorful and elastic, while playing hard with all the elements that only a cartoon can really tackle, from insane character design to over-the-top action and cartoon hijinks. Really, the ending of the first episode is a perfect example of that, but it continues until the end, straight through the climax. However, while the show excels at comedy, there are genuine moments of sincerity that do get you to care for the main characters. The first real example of this was the Season 1 episode set back on Meow's home planet with a Groundhog Day style time loop gimmick, but it continues with episodes such as the one where Dandy goes to the afterlife, and especially the episode where Dandy and Scarlet pretend to date. By the end of its run, the show gives each of its core characters an episode to really shine and explore them in a way that I was not expecting, and that level of emotional attachment to these characters and genuine introspective displays while surrounded by absolute insanity is extremely unique. There is an overarching story to Space Dandy that connects everything and tries to provide some structure to the chaos. There is even some explanation as to how everything wacky that happens to this crew can manage to not affect them from episode to episode that I think is handled really well. I do kinda think the finale got bogged down in all that stuff a bit too much though. While it was nice to have some things explained, I feel like the last 2 episodes, especially the second to last one, felt out of place in the grand scheme of the show. I understand the writers must have been torn, but personally, I would have rather a normal, wacky adventure to end things. Although I didn't hate the ending, it just wasn't really what I watched the show for, and while everything was cool, and it was an incredible display of the artistic talent behind the scenes, it just wasn't really that funny, nor emotional, so it felt a bit odd. I'm trying to avoid spoilers as much as possible, so that's all you'll get from me in that regard. This show is a big recommendation from me. If you want to give this series a shot, I'd say all you have to do is watch the first episode to get a sense for the tone and comedy, but the series does continue to get better as it goes on. Space Dandy may be my favorite on this whole list, it's just a damn good time. So Paranoia Agent did some things I was pretty fascinated by, and I think there's a good and thought-provoking message within the story, but I feel like I didn't enjoy half of the show. This short series, consisting of only 13 episodes, really had me hooked at the beginning. I think that the first few episodes built a good mystery with a solid thematic through line. I really liked episode 3 in particular, about the woman with dual personalities. I think that may be the best episode in the first half of the show. Essentially, the plot of the story is that people keep being attacked by this boy with a dented golden bat on golden roller skates called Shonen Bat. The show did a great job of building out all these individual characters with some sort of connection to each other who are being attacked all seemingly for the same purpose because they are repressing something about themselves to the point of wanting to die. That was a great hook, and I was ready to see where the show was going to go with that, but honestly, it kind of falls off from there. Without spoilers, the detectives on the case bring in a suspect to get to the bottom of this Shonen Bat situation, and from here, the story goes in a totally different direction than I expected. There is an interrogation episode that is done using this weird fantasy storytelling device that felt like it was handled so sloppily that it took me out of the narrative. Regardless, the mystery grows even stronger by the end of this episode, and I was still intrigued to see how the detectives were going to handle this information, but then they just leave the plot of the show for the next 3 to 4 episodes. This is my greatest problem with this series. The pacing and narrative feel like they completely fall off in the back half. Want to know where all the disappointing episodes are? They are right after this big revelation, right when you think the action of the story is going to keep building. Instead, there are episodes, while not necessarily bad, that feel completely superfluous to the main narrative being told. Almost like you're watching an entirely different show than the one you've become invested in. After slogging through some mediocre episodes that I'm sure were artistically relevant for an overall theme or whatever, but delivered really nothing spectacular as far as I can see, that the story does wrap up with 2 excellent final episodes. But I think the show got a bit too bogged down in its own fantastical metaphor. For some reason, this series insisted on not remaining grounded in a realistic thriller world like the first few episodes and wanted to keep going back to some fake fantasy elements for thematic effect. I think that did cause the story to lose its identity and make it difficult for the viewer to understand ongoing events to the point that by the end, the narrative logic did not matter. I could not really explain to you what happened at the end of the show, and not in a good, oh, it's so ambiguous way. I know there's some point the creators are trying to make, but I think they could have done a much better job. All in all, I did like Paranoia Agent, but there are so many other shows I would recommend someone watch before this one. While I think it's competent and well thought out, it just didn't hit the mark for me. Maybe it requires a rewatch to fully appreciate, but I have no urge to ever watch the show again. Paranoia Agent is good, but not great. If you're looking for a somber, introspective show with a serious case of the highs and lows, then check it out. Made in Abyss establishes some really impressive setup for its story. This show does a great job of building a whole world and society in a really smooth way while setting up the 2 lead characters' personalities and goals clearly. Fantastic beginning. That is my first note for Made in Abyss that I wrote after watching the first 2 episodes, and I only have more good things to say about this series. At first, I thought I was getting into something that was limited in scope and would only comprise of 13 episodes. I assumed the first season was the only season and the story would be complete by the end since it came out in 2017. It is only after I was 8 episodes in that I grew more curious about this show. You know, that point where you want to know who created it, how old it is, and other random trivia to help you appreciate it even more because it deserves it. Well, in my research, that's when I found out season 2 was coming this year, and I was so happy to see that. It is extremely apparent that this series is far from being done. As the episodes continued and the world kept growing and growing, I realized I had landed myself into another epic saga that I wouldn't be satisfied with until I made it all the way to the end. An ending that only seemed further and further away as the story continued. So, I cannot give a full review of the show's full story, unlike the other shows on this list, but so far, so great. The weirdest part about why I enjoy this series so much is that I cannot expound on a reason as to why. For those of you who don't know what Made in Abyss is about, it's extremely hard to put into words why this story works for me as much as it does. I almost hesitate to recommend it to someone for fear they'll say it's not that good and I'll snap out of a weird fugue state because on paper, nothing about Made in Abyss sounds particularly interesting. It's a story about two little kids who go traveling down a massive hole in the ground to find the girl's mom. It's a simple premise that the story starts with, which is largely carried by the interesting setting and likable characters, with an early mystery that lingers as the real hook of the series. Yet, it becomes so much more. The series starts out getting you acclimated to this world, to this society built and structured around this massive, mysterious pit, and then it begins moving quickly and keeps a great pace the whole way through, while at the same time continuing to flesh out the world, introduce interesting characters, and present even greater dangers and mysteries that guide the adventure. I'm getting way too in the weeds on this. This series is spectacular. It's deeply tragic at times, even disturbingly so. It is adult and serious, with existential questions raised that these children have to work through as they descend deeper into this abyss. Like moths to a flame, they are being called down into greater danger and unknowable consequences for their bodies and minds. It's really a great premise, ripe for storytelling. The two lead characters also work really well together. Riku is just the slightest tinge of too annoying, but that's so many lighthearted yet headstrong characters that it isn't anything you're not used to as an anime fan. The way that Reg and Riku feel about each other, the relationship they develop, feels like a real connection that we're watching evolve as the story unfolds. Right now, there's definitely some crush stuff going on, which I'm usually not a fan of because I'm super tough and way cool, but I think it works here because it seems like something is gonna come out of it that will be worthwhile. It's not super often you see a pairing like these two in a story like this, and I gotta say, it helps drive the heart of the show. I'm running out of time now. Ozen is great and Inachi almost made me cry. I recommend checking this one out. Okay, so The Promised Neverland may be the biggest come down in television history for me. Never before have I ridden such a high only to wind up choking on farts. The Promised Neverland is a TV show that I recommended to 3 people before I was done with episode 5. I thought it was so good. The twist, I kept saying. The twist. I don't want to spoil it, but the hook is fantastic, is what I would say. Now, I'm afraid to tell them not to bother with the show at all. I've hyped it up so much, but honestly, season 2 is so bad. It's absolutely insane because season 1 is so good, but it's hard to pitch someone to start a new series when in the same breath, you have to tell them that the show gets really terrible. I'm just realizing I've been ranting about an extremely personal and petty problem this show has caused me, and I've lost the beat on this review entirely. Let's start again. The Promised Neverland. This show is a masterclass in writing. Students could literally study how to build tension and characterization, or they could study how to bring it all crashing down hard. So, what is The Promised Neverland about? Well, without spoilers, season 1 is about these children raised in a remote orphanage, living an idealistic lifestyle, but no one stays there past the age of 12 for a reason that the main 3 characters discover, which leads them to want to escape. The entire first season is about these children with very different personalities and desires working together in secret to try and plan an escape while maneuvering around much more powerful forces. It's an intelligent thriller with excellent tension and stakes. I loved this show way more than I was expecting to. Nothing can diminish how excellent season 1 was. I do still recommend that for everyone, but then there's season 2. Before I even started this show, I had heard that season 2 was bad, and honestly, even when I got to it, I didn't get what the hell everyone was saying. I went through about 3/4 of season 2, thinking I was going to be the odd man out and be the only one who liked season 2, but then episode 10 happened. Season 2 was flawed before then, but I thought it was only a couple notches below season 1. It wasn't irredeemable, the story and tone just shifted into a direction I didn't like as much, but I didn't hate it. The story had invested me enough that I was along for the ride, even though things seemed a bit sloppy. Again, without spoilers, when I saw a particular moment in episode 10, I out loud said, "Alright, what the fuck is going on?" And from there, I was on guard. But the weirdest part is that I fell for the story again in that very same episode. I wasn't thrilled, but I was invested once again, up through the first 2/3 of the final episode, and in a matter of minutes, I did a complete 180 against this show. This all sounds very confusing, I know, but just trust me, I really was giving the show a chance, and in maybe 8 minutes or so, it completely lost me. That's how disappointing the ending was. I'm really holding my tongue on this one to avoid spoiling anything, but the ending to this series infuriated me beyond belief. I don't think I've ever been so frustrated with a conclusion with any show that I can remember. So, while I do actually recommend checking out the first season, as it is spectacular, I would recommend you don't watch season 2. If you do feel the desire to watch it, I think you'll actually enjoy it, until the show decides to start shoveling shit right into your face and then flip you off before ending. I actually may make an entire video dedicated to breaking down exactly why this ending is so infuriating. If you'd like to see that, please let me know. Anyway, yeah, what a wild ride. The Promised Neverland is a roller coaster. Erased is yet another show on this list that I had no clue what it would be about, and it's so hard to even describe without spoiling. I feel like for this round of viewer recommendations, I found myself watching a few that were very thematically and tonally similar. Paranoia Agent, Promised Neverland, and Erased all deal with realistic fear. Fear of genuine worldly violence and one's powerlessness in the face of it. Of all these shows, I think Erased delivered in the most consistent and satisfying way. I really enjoyed this show. It is a short thriller with a tight plot that doesn't waste the viewer's time. Nothing in the show is done for the sake of padding. The way this show manages to present information to the viewer is done excellently. Without spoilers, a large part of the show revolves around essentially a Groundhog Day type scenario with a horrific crime that took place 18 years in the past. This show doesn't go back to that gimmick too often though. I think that most other stories that utilize this time loop structure typically end up driving it into the ground by going back a million times. Groundhog Day is a comedy. Half the joke is how infinitely he's been looping. The same can be said about that Space Dandy episode. This story is very much not a comedy, and so I think that it cleverly only uses this time loop a select number of times, and the writers were smart enough to not even make this the hook of the show. Honestly, the crazy weird fantasy magic thing going on is so refreshingly not focused on. This show doesn't care about how the time loop is possible. That doesn't matter one iota. The thing that matters is the characters, specifically the main character, and what this journey is doing for his personal growth. The journey we see this character go through in this story is incredible. It is subtle and yet clear and deliberate, with an ending that is satisfying and powerful. I'm about to get into some very light spoilers, nothing past episode 2, but if you want to skip, please go to this timestamp. So, the main character starts off as this down on his luck, depressed guy struggling to follow his dream without any friends, who has resorted to working part-time as a pizza delivery man. You think that the hook is going to be, oh, but he has these revival powers which allow him to go back in time before horrible things happen to people so he can get a redo to save them. That only happens one time in the whole story. It was just set up for the main events of this character's journey. It was a false hook to lure you into his real journey of finding a renewed sense of self and drive to actually make his life better and become a person others can believe in. And he does most of this reliving the events of a murder when he was a child. A man in a child's body, getting to see the wonders of life and get his own do-over as he's on this darkly twisted crime thriller. Don't tell me that's a show that doesn't sound fantastic to you. Okay, spoilers over. Bottom line, what a fantastic character journey. Oh, also, the theme song absolutely rips. Erased is a show that I can see myself watching again in a couple of years. While the mystery is predictable at times, the show still manages to be engaging with the atmosphere it creates and childlike wonder and appreciation it is able to present, even in a scenario that is darkly tragic. The show also uses some fun visual gimmicks like film reels to present different memories and alternate situations that keep things from feeling too overly complicated. I highly recommend Erased if you enjoy yourself some dark mysteries, grounded in solid character writing, and with a hint of optimism. Now, because I was just thinking about the Erased theme song, I thought it would be fun to quickly rank all of the theme songs for these shows that I discussed in this video. Space Dandy. I mean, come on, this one just rips. Erased. This one is surprisingly upbeat, it fits the optimistic undertones of the story, but I will admit it's greatly aided by the excellent animation sequence. Made in Abyss. There is something whimsical and fantastical about this theme, cheery, yet laced with a mysterious darkness. I think it fits very well. Paranoia Agent. This one creeps me out. I could never listen to it without feeling deeply unsettled, so at least it's unique. The Promised Neverland. I can't even remember this song, and I only finished the show last week. And those are my thoughts on these 5 viewer recommendations. I had a great time watching each of these series, and I'm really grateful to all of you who took the time out of your day to recommend them to me. Now, I want to know, if you've seen all 5 of these shows, which was your favorite? If you haven't seen any, which sounds the most interesting to you based on my review? Please let me know all this and any other recommendations for shows that you have in the comments. There's a good chance I'll add them to my growing list. But that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I hope to see you in the next video, but until then, I'll shut up.